Welcome, everyone, to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things. This is our live podcast show. We are doing every Thursday at 8 o'clock. And I am here today with a guest that I've had on my audio podcast before. She's been part of our Wednesday Theory series for psychologists and therapists. And I have Maegan Megginson. She is based out of Oregon in the US. And she is a couples and sex therapist. And she's here today to talk to about how we can protect our relationships during challenging times. So welcome, Maegan. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Carrie. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so I want to start off because when you and I talked about the title of this, I had originally said, how can we improve our relationships? And you said, why don't we change it to how do we protect? Why is the word protect better than the word improve?
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me that we made that change. I've been thinking a lot about the difference between what we work on in our relationship during challenging times as opposed to normal. I'm going to use air quotes, right? But, challenging times versus normal times in terms of how we're caring for our relationship. And this is really coming right now from my work as a couples therapist. I've transferred my practice online. I'm seeing all of my couples in their homes virtually. And we've been talking a lot about how much bandwidth they have right now to work on their relationship. So I've really noticed that, during challenging times, our bandwidth to work on anything other than just making it through the day is much lower than it is on normal days. So in normal times, we have more emotional bandwidth to dive deep, to work on, historical relationship issues, communication patterns. We have more bandwidth to try to improve our relationship in these big romantic ways. But when we're experiencing something challenging, when stress is really increased, we just don't have the energy or the emotional bandwidth to do deep work. So a lot of my work with couples during this challenging time has shifted to how do we protect the relationship? How do we take care of the relationship so that you can make it through the challenging time as unscathed as possible? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And obviously in this time, we're talking April 2020, we're in a pandemic, which is not a normal challenging time. Can you give some examples of what a typical challenging time might fall under?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I'm thinking about my own caseload right now. What things have been challenging recently? I have couples who are dealing with the loss of a child. I have couples who are dealing with caring for aging parents or coping with job loss or financial strain or infidelity or sexual problems. I think these are all experiences that, we all encounter at some point in our life, something challenging. So anything that taxes you emotionally or requires more attention and energy than your baseline life, I would categorize as a challenging experience.
Yeah, and that can come up all the time
in any way.
Isn't it harder? I would assume, right? Sometimes one person in the couple is going through it, but if both people are going through it, that's going to add a whole nother level of challenge, correct?
Absolutely. It is a lot easier. Some couples have a rule that only one of us can struggle at a time. One of us can be having an existential crisis at a time or a meltdown or, a career transition. That way the other person can step up and be more of the rock or the supporter. But, life has different plans every now and then. And there are chapters when we're both struggling with different things or we're both struggling with exactly the same thing. But either way, it is much harder to take good care of the relationship when everybody is taxed versus when it's, one partner more so than the other.
Yeah. And you have something called the Challenging Times Protocol. What does that mean?
Yeah. I just made that term up, but I was just thinking about, how I love systems. And we were talking about this earlier, right? Like anytime you can give me 4 steps to follow, I'm going to take them.
Yes.
And we have to take that with a grain of salt because especially during challenging times, there is no one protocol that is going to solve all of your problems or it's going to be applicable to every single situation. But if you can think of it more as a skeleton, right? This is something I can look at. I can use this to help make sense of my experiences, but be flexible and willing to adapt and make up your own rules as you go along as well. So that's my disclaimer for the challenging times protocol before anybody commits it to memory. But basically, I've been thinking a lot about, how do we shift our focus in our relationships to protecting our relationships from further damage when we're experiencing something challenging together? And how do we really shift that intention to step up and take care of each other so that we feel like we're working through something together and we're not working against each other? Because that never ends well when we feel like we're trying to work against each other in a moment when we're both really struggling.
Yeah, so let's go through. You kind of have 3 steps and kind of a bonus here at the end of kind of how we can do this, how we can protect our romantic relationships during challenging times.
Yep. So first, I think it's really important when we're going through something challenging to take a pause and think about, what was I struggling with before? What individually within myself, between my partner and I in our relationship, what was challenging for us before the challenging time, started? And I call these our pre-existing vulnerabilities. What problems were we having before this all started? And I think it's really important that we name these explicitly, because what we know is that all of the stuff that we're struggling with is exemplified, magnified, flares up, however you want to describe it, when life gets tough. When we have less bandwidth, we struggle more. It feels unfair, like it shouldn't work that way, but it does. So some examples of that individually might be if you suffer from depression and anxiety, if you're working through past traumas, if you have an eating disorder, if you're struggling with low libido, right? These are all personal individual struggles that are going to flare up when life gets really stressful. And if we think about our relationship, if you are having a hard time in your relationship before you go through something difficult, if it's you're not communicating well, you're fighting a lot, you're having sexual problems, you're trying to heal from infidelity, if you're dealing with something like that, and then you enter a chapter of challenge in your relationship, all of those problems are going to feel much bigger. So if we can name them, if we can say, okay, I know that I'm bringing into this mess variables X, Y, and Z, it becomes much easier between me and my partner to meet each other with patience and compassion when those flare-ups happen. And we can really start to name that now's not the time to solve that problem. I have limited bandwidth. I'm super stressed by this challenging situation. Now is not the time to try to solve the communication problems, the depression, the anxiety that we had way before this started. So don't try to solve the problems right now, but be able to say, hey, this is what's going on. Let's name it. And let's try to really show up with lots of patience and compassion until we get to the other side of this. And then we can address all of that stuff.
So can you give us, and you did this when we did the audio version of the podcast a year or so ago, I think now, some examples of how this would be, right? So in real life, so if one or both partners are having a challenging time in life, and let's say one suffers from anxiety and the other one maybe doesn't communicate their emotions as well. I'm just kind of throwing random stuff out. And they're kind of in this heated argument during this challenging time. It seems so easy to say like, oh, let's recognize, what's going on and we'll just stop and go, and calm down. But most people have a hard time kind of bringing that emotion level down. Mm-hmm. So what would be some steps or a conversation that would happen between the two to get back to that space of what you're talking about?
Yeah, Carrie, that's a really good point. And it reminds me to say, like, avoiding conflict is not the objective during a challenging time. Like, you will fail. Conflict it's going to show up. It's inevitable. So if conflict unfolds, let it unfold. Like there's no magic bullet. There's no magic word you can use to interrupt conflict once you're swept up into the cycle. What I would really invite you to do during a challenging time is, after the conflict occurs, just name that just happened. Hey, I know we just got really tangled up about, my anxiety and you feeling stressed out, whatever it is. I know we just got really tangled up about that. I know we just had a really huge fight. I'm sorry that happened. I don't have the bandwidth to figure it out with you right now, but I can give you some reassurance that I'm here, I'm committed to you, we're going to work this out together. And then you just got to move on. if you're struggling in that way, you should definitely be connected to a couples therapist in the chapter of the challenge, right? If you're really struggling to be patient and compassionate with each other, you need to bring a third party in to help you weather the storm. Otherwise, you might not make it out the other side of the challenge.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked about this before. There is a stigma about therapists, whether it's for one-on-one or for couples, that people feel like there's something wrong with them. There's a problem and it's a bad sign. But being able to have a third party, or again, one-on-one, whatever it is you choose to do for yourself, can make a difference, right? Can you just talk about that as well? Because I'm sure a lot of people feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes having to come to a couples therapist. They feel like, oh my gosh, something's really wrong. It's not going to work. But how do you kind of help couples get through this in a positive way?
The first thought that just popped into my mind, Carrie, when you said, going to therapy means something's wrong with me, is like, well, of course something's wrong with you. Like something's wrong with all of us, like something's wrong with me. And so like join the club. We're all struggling. And I think it is really important to be able to name, just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Right? Or just because
say that again, Megan.
Yeah. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Right. And it doesn't mean that it's a sign of the end times for your marriage or, whatever the case may be. It's part of the common human experience to have struggles, especially when you are going through something challenging. Because remember what I said earlier, our bandwidth for coping with everything is severely limited when we're going through something really challenging. So I see connecting with a therapist or, whatever means of support. For some people, it's a pastor. For some people, it's, a best friend. You can get support in many different ways. Obviously, I'm going to vote for therapy. But it's not a sign that something bad's going to happen. It's not a sign that you are defective. It really is just a very compassionate way that you are providing extra support for yourself during a moment when you could use an extra hand.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I second that. Of course, I'm a huge fan of therapists and psychologists and how they help us in so many different ways. So we have a second step here. What is our second step that you recommend for us to protect our relationships during challenging times?
So during challenging times, I think it's really helpful to get clear on what your default stress response is. We all have them. This is, how do I normally handle stressful situations? And it could be little stress or a big stress. It could be like, I had a bad day at work to, my mom just died, really anywhere on that spectrum. And the spectrum for me is like, over here, we have people who put their head in the sand when things get stressful. So I'm going to avoid, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to address it. And then over here on the opposite end of that spectrum, we have fighters. People who need to figure it all out right now. They want to be 3 steps ahead of the challenge. They want to make sure they're protecting themselves. And I don't know why this is, but for some reason, we tend to partner with someone who copes very differently than we do. So if you're a fighter, your partner is probably somewhere over here on the avoidance side of the spectrum. And of course, when we're going through something really challenging and we're not coping with it in the same way, it can lead to this really quickly, this sense that we're not in it together. We don't have each other's backs. And that's a problem. So the next step in this protocol is to get clear with your partner on, how are we both defaulting right now? Oh, I'm feeling more anxious, so I'm really wanting to take action in these ways. And you're feeling really fearful, and the way that you want to cope with that is to put your head in the sand. If we know that, if we can name it, it's a whole lot easier to start to find a way towards the middle where we both feel like we can be met. If we don't name it and we're not really clear about who's doing what and why, it's very challenging to find a way to meet in that middle space.
Yeah. And for those watching, if you have any questions, you can definitely post them in the chat as well. Do you find, Megan, as you're talking about really clarifying and naming things for yourself, for your relationship, for your partner, that's something that people have an easy time doing?
Which part, like identifying the stress response or just talking about it in general?
Both. Because I would think that some people who've done a lot of work on themselves, are really in tune with themselves, probably do a great job of that. And then you have people that really just are not good at it. They don't know how to put words to it. And that can feel frustrating for them internally, which makes it hard to communicate with their partner.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's different for all of us. And yes, those of us who are more familiar with these phrases or these experiences will have an easier time talking about them. But I also think just, keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. What I just shared is enough to help you get the conversation going. Do you tend to put your head in the sand, or do you tend to fight when things get stressful? Can you identify, A or B, which is more true for you? If you can identify that, if you can ask your partner that question, hopefully they'll be able to answer it. If they're not able to answer it, again, that's a really good sign that you should get some support from a therapist, because you are working with a partner in that moment who, for whatever reason, is having a harder time accessing insight. And we do need a level of insight in order to have these more nuanced conversations with our partners.
Yeah. Do you find that when we're having these conversations that a lot of couples are able to do this in the moment, or is this something where they need to kind of calm down first and then have a second conversation and they're able to speak in the way you're talking about?
Well, ideally, you're having these conversations proactively. So you're watching this conversation right now, and you schedule time tonight after dinner to have the conversation with your partner when it's neutral territory, right? There's no conflict. You're not trying to overcome something in that moment. So the more proactive you can be in utilizing these strategies, the easier it's going to be. Otherwise, if you're waiting until it feels alive in the moment, then you are fighting against some conflict that is alive in the relationship right then. If that's the case, yes, I do recommend pausing. Don't try to move straight from an argument into talking about stress response and how are we meeting each other's needs. You really need to wait until you cool down. Schedule time to chat about that later.
Yeah, I like that. So we have a third one about identifying your needs. Let's talk about that. And again, talking about how this helps to protect our relationships in challenging times.
I think this is the most important piece of this whole challenging times protocol. Yes, you need to be clear on what struggles you're bringing into the relationship that are flaring up right now. Yes, it's helpful to be clear about your stress response and to have some shared understanding with your partner about how you connect and how you tackle challenging situations. But more than anything right now, you need to get really clear internally first. So this is an exercise that starts with me and starts with my partner doing their work and then us coming together and sharing. First, I need to get really clear, Carrie, on what is it that I need to be okay during this challenging time. And this is slippery. The answer to this question might evolve moment to moment. It might be different day to day, but you need to be listening here. What do I need to feel okay right now? I have a couple of categories. I've created these categories based on what I've been hearing in my office for the past several weeks as people have been dealing with these challenging situations. The first category or spectrum is productivity or rest. Is what I need right now more about resting, or is it more about being productive and getting my hands dirty? Do I need to take a nap? Do I need to watch Netflix, or do I need to learn a new skill or tackle a project in the yard so I think a lot of people will lean towards like do, especially when times are really challenging, like stay busy, keep your mind occupied. But that is not always what we need. Sometimes we need permission to do nothing. And it's very important that you and your partner be able to say, what I need right now is to watch Netflix, and your partner to say, well, what I need right now is to learn a new skill. Okay, great. I'll support you if you'll support me, right? That's one category. The next category is connection versus solitude. So am I needing connection with other people? Am I needing to do a Zoom happy hour with friends? Am I needing to sit down and have a long conversation with you about the things that feel scary or hard or stressful right now? Or do I need solitude? Do I need a room where the door is closed and the kids aren't allowed to come in and I can just use no words? I was just talking to some friends the other day about how during challenging times as therapists, we tend to run out of words by the end of the day. Sometimes we're like, I'm out, I just can't, I just need to sit in a room and stare at a wall. Both are fine, but you do need to be able to say, here's what I'm needing right now when it comes to being alone or needing connection with others. And then the third category, which is especially applicable to relationships, is, am I needing space, physical space, or am I needing physical contact? And this could also look like sex, right? Am I needing sex? Am I needing that kind of connection? Or am I needing to lay side by side in bed and watch TV? Am I needing to be in a room by myself, or am I needing a big hug? Right? What does my body need in terms of physical touch? So these are three categories. I think if you can place what you need somewhere along that spectrum and communicate it to your partner and vice versa, you're going to have a much easier time of negotiating and getting your needs met in the relationship so that you both feel like mutually supported, rather than falling into this situation where you're both fighting each other to get what you need all the time, which can be a really big problem during challenging times.
And I love that you're giving a breakdown of it's this or that, so it's very clear and kind of easy to decide. But what happens if, you're the one person in the relationship says, I need solitude right now. And the other one says, well, I need to be with other people. And what I need is to be with you. How do you kind of deal with that? Because I think that's pretty common too. One wants one thing, one wants something else. And now you're frustrated again. How do you make that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that the question is the most explosive potentially when it's about sex, right? Like, but what I need right now is sex to feel closer to you. And the other partner says, but what I need is to be by myself. Like how it feels like a bind. It feels like gridlock. The best thing that the most mature or the healthiest relationships are able to do is negotiate. Okay, so we both need something. I definitely want to get my need met, but I also really care about my partner and I want to meet their need as well. And I hope that my partner feels the same about me. So if you have this mutual level of respect and trust in your relationship that you both are going to show up for each other, you can have a negotiation at that point about how do we do both of these things.
Yeah.
It's messy. It's not
yeah,
simple.
It seems so simple.
Yeah, it's not simple, but life is not simple and challenging times are not simple. So it comes back to patience and compassion, right? Challenging times, I think, just continually come back. How can I be patient and compassionate and really willing to negotiate with my partner around topics that are not easily solved? If they were easily solved, like we wouldn't be experiencing this at all.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You have a special final pro tip for all of this.
I do have a pro tip.
I love it. What is it?
Yeah, my pro tip here is schedule time. So when you're in a challenging period of your relationship, schedule time daily to check in with each other. And this check-in, you can really boil it down to answering two questions. How are you doing? How am I doing individually? And how am I feeling about our relationship? Is there anything that I'm needing from you? Because these needs that we're unpacking, productivity, solitude, physical touch, these spectrums, like I said, what I need can change moment to moment, day to day, and how I'm feeling about the relationship probably is changing day to day. So this is not a one and done conversation, right? If you have one great conversation where you're like, I watched Maegan's video and I talked about all of those points, we're going to be great. You're not going to be great. Like you might be great for 2 days and then you're going to crash and burn, because this is a conversation that needs to be really fluid and ongoing in the relationship. A lot of couples find that chatting first thing in the morning before work, especially if there are young kids in the house, like getting up a little bit early can be a good time to check in. Other couples find that having a happy hour together is a good time to check in. Some couples feel that their lives are so chaotic and unpredictable, but that there is no consistent time. And if that's the case, I just encourage you to set reminders on your phone, be able to text each other throughout the day to check in about these questions. It's important that you're willing to be flexible and creative as long as you're prioritizing actually doing it.
Yeah. And for those, again, this is a very strange, challenging time for the world as a whole with this pandemic. How do people kind of recognize between this is a challenging time, my partner and I are having a moment, and I'm going to work on these tools, versus either this is the wrong person for me or this is a toxic relationship? Are there differences between all of those?
Whew, yeah, that's a complicated question. And of course, there are differences. The first pieces that come to mind, if you were having a ton of problems before the challenging time started, it's probably time to take a look at what's going on here. And I find that easiest to do with the support of a couples therapist, that sort of neutral third party that can see the forest through the trees. One of the biggest indicators of toxicity is safety. Do I feel safe? Do I feel like I can share my emotions with my partner and they're going to be respected and honored? If I don't feel safe, if I don't trust that my partner has my back, if I don't trust that my partner is going to be respectful and validating of my emotional experiences, that's really when you want to begin to look at, is this relationship right for me? You never need to, get ahead of yourself. Just because you don't feel safe in one moment or you're having a time of really escalated conflict doesn't mean you have to get divorced tomorrow. But I think everybody deserves to be in a relationship that feels respectful and balanced and trusting. And if you don't feel those qualities, you should get some support to really discern if this is the match that's best suited for you.
Yeah, very well said. So I just want to recap these kind of 3.5 tips, I'll say,
right.
that you gave for those that kind of came in, just kind of real quick. Again, the 3 tips for being able to protect your relationship during challenging times.
Okay, so tip number 1 is get really clear on what was a problem before the challenging time ever came to fruition. Were you depressed or anxious? Were you struggling with trauma symptoms? Were you fighting with your partner? Were you having sexual problems? Any problems that existed before the challenging time are very likely in flare-up mode right now, and now is not the time to try to solve them or fix them. So the best thing you can do is name them and be really clear with your partner that, like, hey, we're both struggling with this bucket of things. So let's work together to meet these struggles with lots of patience and compassion, and, bookmark it so that we can circle back around after the challenging chapter and address them very thoughtfully. Second step here is to identify what your default stress response is. So are you more of a head in the sand kind of person, or are you more of a fight for your life kind of person when things get stressful? And are you and your partner the same, or are you different? More likely than not, you're different, because we tend to partner with people who respond to stress in a different way than we do. If that's the case, name it. Have a dialogue with your partner about how you're both responding, which leads into the third point, which is all about talking about needs, right? If we're clear about how we're struggling, if we're clear about how we're responding to stress, it makes it that much easier to talk with our partner about what I need to take good care of myself and what I really need from you to feel very connected and safe in our relationship. If you're balancing that together, if you're checking in daily to make sure you're both on the same page about what needs you have and how you're showing up for each other, you're probably going to make it to the other side of the challenging time, honestly, in a better place than you were in before the challenging time, at least in terms of the relationship. But even if you're not in a better place, our hope or our intention is that you protect your relationship from further damage.
I love it. This has been wonderful, Maegan. Again, really clear, concise tips. If people want to learn more about you, connect you, they have questions about what we talked about, where can they do that?
You can check out my website. I am the founder of the Center for Couples and Sex Therapy. We're based in Portland, Oregon. And our website is www.ccstpdx.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maegan. Again,
Yeah.
This has been wonderful. We always love having you on the show.
Thank you.
Keep bringing us great tips, especially for couples. So thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks so much. Good luck.